you can't actually remove the autism and then still have the same person. Like my son very much would not be the same person. You can't just take away this little dash, here and there. And um, he just wouldn't be him for all his charms. So I feel, yeah, and even me, I'd be completely different. Like, yes, would I like to get rid of some of my anxiety a lot of the time? Yes. But there are a lot of things I can do to help with that, and there are a lot of things the world can do to help with that.
Hi, I'm Tamara, and this is TELUS Talks with Tamara Taggart. What does it really mean to love your child and yourself exactly as they are? Julie M. Green is a writer and mother who discovered she was autistic almost a decade after her son's diagnosis. In her new memoir, she tells the story of raising a neurodivergent child while navigating her own late-in-life diagnosis. Julie's story is about breaking stereotypes, rejecting perfectionism, and embracing neurodiversity as part of what makes us human. I hope you enjoy the conversation. This podcast is brought to you by TELUS Smart Home Security. Secure, simplify, and easily monitor your home from anywhere using the Smart Home Security app. Visit telus.com/smarthome-security to learn more about Canada's most trusted security provider. Hi, Julie. It's really good to see you.
Likewise.
So, brand new book, first book. Congratulations.
Thank you.
How does it feel that your baby is going out into the world?
Well, I sort of joke to people that it's so much slower than birthing a human baby. Like I could have had 2 human babies in the time it takes. It's such a process. Like I actually wrote this, I think, 3 years ago. I think it's the same probably with film. People don't realize there's so many steps, so many people involved. And yeah, so it's been a really long haul, but it's amazing to finally be getting to the point where we're there and it will be out there.
It's not easy to do. I mean, anybody who's written a book has said that. It's just so hard to do. It takes, all of you, right? So your book is called Motherness, a Memoir of Generational Autism, Parenthood, and Radical Acceptance. So, and I mean, I know so many people that have been waiting for a book like this. When you were describing your book, and I'm sure you've done this a zillion times in the last little while, how do you describe it to people?
Like you've said, I think I wanted to write the book that I didn't have as a parent. And I liken it to basically looking at a Venn diagram almost of my son and I and all the ways that we differ and overlap. And just the fact with my journey took 10 years for me to actually realize I was autistic and to finally go through the process of being diagnosed, just because girls have been left out of the picture diagnostically for so long. So I think really it's like a reckoning for a lot of parents and hopefully women who will see themselves, because as you say, there seemed to be nothing like this. Definitely not when I started on my journey. When my son was diagnosed at 3, there was so little even about autism generally, let alone about autism in girls. And now there does seem to be this surge of people coming forward, like later in life, actually realizing all this time they haven't truly known. They've known there's been something other about themselves, but not really understanding what that is. And it's a massive thing.
Yes, it is. So you learned that you were autistic when you were 44.
Yes.
I mean, I have so many questions just about that alone. I'm not even sure where to start. Did you know something was up? Was it a shock to find this out, or did you lead? I'm asking you now 50 questions in one. So let's start with what led you to a diagnosis?
Yeah, it's a lot to unpack. And as I said, it took me 10 years of basically first it was getting on that steep learning curve about autism generally when my son was diagnosed at 3. And then as he was growing up, it was just every now and then there'd be these flashes where I would sort of intuit something like, well, of course he can't wear that. That's awful. It's really picky and it's like sandpaper, and everyone would be like, there's nothing wrong with it. Or we'd both, I'd be like, don't use the hand dryer. We'd both cover our ears in the public washrooms, dry your, just a lot of sensory issues. Um, but then other things just didn't align at all. My son would have a lot of like more epic meltdowns, and he had sort of more of the typical presentation, of being into trains and different things and numbers. And that was not at all me, but there were just some little moments that were really uncanny, how similar we were. And it took a very long time. I was kind of back in the blogging community, and I was doing some parenting writing and writing about autism generally. And I met another mom through that writing who had been diagnosed. And in chatting to her and learning about how her autism actually showed itself, I went, oh, okay, because it was a very different time. Nowadays, you can find all kinds of resources about what it looks like in women and girls, and checklists, and I mean, just informal things, lots of lived experiences from other autistic self-advocates. But back then, it was a wasteland. even even autism awareness generally was just so far from where it is now, and I'm talking like 2012. I'm not talking a really long time ago. Um, so it was such an incremental thing, and eventually, as all these pieces dropped, I finally said to my doctor, uh, "You know what? Like, I think I might be autistic." And to her credit, she didn't say, "Well, nah, there's no way, Julie. Like, look at you. You're articulate. You're a writer. You're a mom." But she knew I had a very long history of mental health challenges, and she obviously knew about my son. And knowing autism is majority, at least, a hereditary condition, she put me forward for the assessment. And then COVID came along, and I kind of forgot all about it. And a year later, I ended up getting the call to be assessed through CAMH. And that was that. So I was surprised, but not surprised. It's a little bit different when you suddenly have a 9-page report um, in front of you. But yeah, I mean, the thing is too, I'm kind of a product of my generation. People didn't know I was growing up in the late 70s, early 80s. Autism was just not there, or it looked like it was Rain Man, and it was definitely very rarely girls unless they had really significant traits. Um, so growing up in that, people didn't know what they didn't know, so they managed to find other ways to excuse some of my behaviors because I would completely lose my mind if there was a change in routine or anything like things I think about now were very obvious signs. I was a big collector, and everything had to be exactly itemized. And if anybody touched anything, and like so, a lot of rituals, and I always had one friend, but I was an observer, and I was extremely shy. So I was extremely shy. That was excused that way. I was also an only child. So that excused a lot. That's like, well, she escapes through books. She's not very social. She's socially awkward. Um, she's not really a loner, but she also needs to get her own way. And so some of that inflexibility and rigidity and, for instance, having these big reactions I mean, that was all excused away through different labels and different things, which I now understand.
Yeah, it's so interesting because, I mean, it wasn't until your son was diagnosed that you really started to I guess, understand autism, because as a mom, we do research and we read everything and we want to know all the things about our child. Um, what did you initiate talks with your doctor about your son? Is that how? So let's talk about your son for a minute, and then I want to know how. Yeah. So tell us about your son.
Totally different, really, because I had a different doctor, and my son had a pediatrician. We were living in Toronto at the time, and again, first time mom. I just probably blame myself for lots of things. My son had really intense colic, which I didn't know at the time is kind of considered, maybe not exclusively, but they're starting to point to that could be a very early indicator of autism. But I internalized a lot of this. Like, I'm the first time mom. What am I doing? I have this baby who's very intense and frankly difficult to settle. Made all these excuses, but it wasn't until really I enrolled him in daycare, and suddenly he was around peers, and it wasn't just me blaming myself. The staff there kind of pulled me aside one day and said, "You know what? You might want to talk to his doctor," because they didn't actually say autism, but they just said, "Look, we think maybe um, he's doing certain things." And so then I obviously, when the doctor asked me lots of questions, um, and then he had his assessment when he and was diagnosed when he was 3. So, but again, I didn't really know. It's just your child is your child, and I thought potentially, I have this child who's very intense and very sensitive, and um, but seemed to cry so much more than the other babies, and um, yeah. So in some sense, but again, it really knew very little about autism, and
Well, and you had nothing else to compare him to, right? Like, when it's your first child, I mean, there's no handbook that comes with, being a mom. You're just like, okay, so all babies are like this, or this is what we don't know, right? And we do the best that we can.
or we automatically think it's, what am I doing? I have not done this particular method. I have to try this. I haven't tried that. Um, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So so your son was diagnosed when he was 3, and then in between his diagnosis. Well, let me ask you this. I'm curious. Did 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 parenting him once he had his diagnosis become, I don't want to say easier, but did it make more sense? Like, did you have more support? Did you have
Um, it's a strange thing. I don't know what it's like these days. I like to think things had moved on, but essentially it was weird. You get this report in the mail, and that I think I had a phone call with a social worker, and then it was like, well, we recommend this therapy, that therapy will get you. And then it's like, off you go. There was no regular, so my son would do um, various different groups. He didn't qualify at the time for the very, very intensive therapy, like the 40-hour week. But he was doing different therapies every week. And I had done a parenting workshop or something that was mandatory for the therapies. And I'd met a couple other moms there who were really on the ball about different fundings and things that you could get. And they sort of helped me out. And I learned a lot kind of through them, because one had a son who was older, and that was a very nice feeling to not feel alone. But there was honestly, there were services for my son, but I think emotionally and everything, it was just like, off you go. I'd like to think it's different now.
well, I think it depends where you live, right? What province you live in and the supports that are there. But I mean, I think we all know as parents, uh, that it's difficult, at times. I know it is for my son. My son has Down syndrome, and there's no support. So it's difficult, right? So a lot of what you're talking about is really familiar, but in obviously a different way, but it's familiar what you're saying, especially the blame part. And I always find that interesting how as mothers we do that. And it's, I think it's just our instinct to want to, we want the best for our kids, and we want to think that we're doing the best we can. And if you're not getting that, and meanwhile, you hadn't been diagnosed yet.
No, and I was really struggling. I had postpartum depression because I'd had a history of depression anyway. Um, but yeah, as you say, it's difficult too, and it's an invisible disability because it took so long even um, to recognize what that was. So I really had all these toddler years of finding it incredibly difficult. I was very lucky. My parents have always been very involved, and I talk about it in the book actually that my dad, we called him the baby whisperer because my son took so long to settle, and I would tap out as well. And again, not knowing, thinking I find I need to be his mom. Why can't I settle him? Why am I so drained? I didn't seem to have the resources within myself. So there was a lot of like, you're not a good enough mom. I couldn't understand that basically you're so enmeshed with this child, and the co-regulation can kind of go one or two ways. Your calm can really help calm the baby, but if your baby is not calm and is agitated, like I had a really, really hard time in my own nervous system because you kind of mirror each other. And again, I had no idea. I often would get, like throughout my whole life, even since I was a child, my overwhelm would often just present as me getting sick. I'd have migraine attacks, throwing up, and just have to be locked in a dark room. Basically, sensory deprivation. And again, not knowing any of these links, they've since made connections that, autistic women do. There's a much more prevalence of us having migraines. So we're kind of internalizing this overwhelm, and so much is to do with the nervous system and the amygdala and your stress hormones and all of that. But again, I didn't know, so I just interpreted this as
You're not a good mom. Yeah. Yeah, you're not a good mom. And it is perfectionism, does that play into, okay, tell me about perfectionism.
I mean, I think it's quite a common thread for autistic women and girls, but um, I really don't know the stats on that, to be honest. I know it is there, but yeah, it was definitely an issue all through growing up, and my son has it as well, but in different ways. So and this is something I talk about and compare to, like he would have certain toys, and if there was a manufacturing defect where there was a tiny little like line in something, he'd throw out the whole thing. Like I'd have to run and rescue things from landfill because he just, if anything, one piece had the slightest defect, he would have a meltdown, or he would throw it out, and I would kind of take it out and then hide it because I thought, we're not putting things to landfill. You just got this toy. Whereas for me, it came out quite differently. Like I struggled a lot with math, like a lot of people do with I think I had dyscalculia, but again, it wasn't diagnosed because academically so strong, but I really struggled in math. So I'd have massive crying jags, and just literally every time there was an exam, I would build myself up with so much anxiety. And my mom still laughs about it. She said, "You'd come home from school. Oh my God, I bombed that test." And then, it would turn out you got 95% on it. And it was like, okay, well, I was super, super, and it was never coming from anybody, from my parents. There's no pressure from anybody else. My mom was like, "I'm totally happy. You get B's or whatever." Just, but it was all from me. And I've had a lot of situations like that where, yeah, those are the times when I do uh, pretty much have, I guess, what for me would look like a meltdown, um, like hysterical crying or just a complete breakdown. So university was very hard too. Every week I was pretty much ready to drop out. It was so difficult. And I'd call my grandmother who lived back home and she'd have to give me this pep talk. And I thought, she might as well just record this because it's like I somehow got through it. But again, not having any accommodations, not knowing what the heck was going on, it was just a real struggle.
Yeah, it would be so difficult. So, talk to me about, I know this from my own experience. When you have a child with a disability, um, people like to, not everyone, but a lot of people like to blame the mother or question the mother. I remember, having my son. He was just in his little, sleeper baby thing, and I decided to finally go out and have like a manicure or pedicure or something. And these people walked by and they wanted to see my baby, and they looked at him because my son has a visible disability. So there's a big difference there too, right? And they were like, "Oh." And I said, "Oh, yeah, my son, has Down syndrome." He was, I'm not kidding, 2 months old. And then they proceeded to tell me that if I would have taken more vitamin D, he wouldn't have had that. And I was like, okay, so that's not how extra chromosomes work, but whatever." And I would assume, and I know you should never assume, that with autism, it's probably a lot more, um there's a lot more blame, let's say, towards a mother.
Yes. Yes. I mean, there's a whole history of it, right? Because back in the day, in the 50s, it was autism was blamed on cold detached mothers. It was called refrigerator mothers. So mothers were entirely blamed. Clearly, they didn't know the genetic component at the time. And then eventually, science gradually started to catch up. But then every week it was something else. It was, dare I say, it was vaccines. And then if you were as a mom, if you chose to put toxins in your child's body, notwithstanding that autism existed long before any of these vaccines, but hey, so every week it was a new thing, it was like, well, you took Tylenol, or well, in my case, I had antibiotics because I had a UTI late in my pregnancy. So then, every week there's some new potential study or thing, which is perpetuating this idea. You think, oh, what did I do? I must have done something to cause this. Um, the irony, now I know it's hereditary and it's on my husband's side, and I'm not even really sure on my side, but it's like, well, okay, we are to blame because it's hereditary. It's been there through generations, but in that sense. But especially, yeah, especially if your child too has what they call behaviors, if they're having meltdowns, which look sometimes to the untrained eye like tantrums, then right away you have a lot of people in public wagging their finger at you, thinking, oh, you haven't disciplined them, or you've spoiled them, or if I were you, like, you should be doing this, you should be doing that. And like you said, they are not really getting it at all.
But it begs the question, uh, dare I put this out there, that, I love my son the way he is. Like, I love my son, and and he loves himself. And, um, and it's like, I this idea that we have to find someone to blame for something that is not normal, or however you want to phrase that. And instead of, support and education and, really, like, at the end of the day, the support that the child needs, the parent needs, whatever it may be, is kind of where we should be focusing, instead of this blame or this idea of a cure or whatever it might be.
Yeah, because, this is what concerns our community is that a cure is like, that's one step away from just eliminating people. So it's not a question of let's help people live their best lives and support them where they're at and value who they are as they are. It's this idea, and I'm sure people probably were like this to you too, like, well, did you not have screening or why did you go ahead and why did you, rather than accepting, as you said, and yes, it is possible to love your child the way they are. It's not to say they don't have challenges or whatever, but to my mind, I think maybe I'm wrong, but if you can't actually remove the autism and then still have the same person. Like my son very much would not be the same person. You can't just take away this little dash, here and there, and um, he just wouldn't be him for all his charms. So I feel, yeah, and even me, I'd be completely different. Like, yes, would I like to get rid of some of my anxiety a lot of the time? Yes. But there are a lot of things I can do to help with that, and there are a lot of things the world can do to help with that to not make it so hard. Rather than just,
Yeah. Well, and you finding out that, later in your life, not that 44 is old or anything like that, but do you know what I mean? In the case of supports, it would have been nice if you would have, or your parents would have known this about you when you were younger. So everybody could have, gone, Julie, this is, or here's the support. She needs these accommodations in school. She needs these accommodations in university. That takes, that would have taken so much stress off of you.
yeah, I mean, I my challenges are relatively few in the grand scheme of things. Like I don't think even if there were supports, I probably wouldn't have got them, but I think it's even just a mindset thing of knowing where this is coming from and not internalizing those messages of, you're difficult, you're a drama queen, um, why are you so rigid? Why are you like this? Why are you like that? And feeling all that shame and guilt that you're defective, there's something wrong with you. And it largely becomes like personality flaws that you internalize. Um, so even just having different messaging, which is, it's not too late. I'm in my mid 40s, but I think my self esteem now is healthier than ever because I still have nothing's changed. I still have the same sensory issues. And if not, they're up there through perimenopause. Things really kick up a level. Um, but it's like having that understanding, I feel, is not too late because you can have some self compassion and you can understand, look, this doesn't mean, you know, um, it's a personality issue. It's just as I said, having a bit more self compassion and knowing where that's coming from and figuring out the things that will help you look after yourself.
So true. So, one of the things that we like to do on the podcast is thank our guests for being here. And we ask them to choose a Canadian registered charity. And you chose Best Buddies. I love Best Buddies so much. So thank you for choosing them. We're going to make a donation in your name as a thank you for being a guest on the podcast. So thank you for choosing Best Buddies.
That's amazing. And thank you for doing that. It's really great. It's a great initiative. It's a great initiative.
When I saw you chose them, I was like, oh, yes, I love them. It's so great. So when we talk about, acceptance and, redefining normal, I feel like we've been, on this podcast, we've been talking about that a lot lately. Like, what is normal? What does that even mean? Normal to me might be different to you, might be different to somebody halfway across the world, right? We can't paint everybody with, the same brush. It's just that's not how life works. So when you know, you say you want to redefine autism, not as a deficit, but as a difference with its own joys. What does that look like to you?
Well, I just think the narrative, it's just been so difficult. There's such a binary, and the media it's getting a little bit better, but the media sort of has perpetuated it in all the shows we have and the books we've had. I mean, it's evolving, but it's autism is either this amazing superpower and, someone is a savant or they're just incredible and it's such a tremendous gift, or it is a tragedy and it has ruined their parents' lives. And like the truth, like people, humans are complex. We're all really nuanced. Even autistic people. It's not this whole idea of a binary is just it's it's full of like just these stereotypes. And I'd love it if we could just move away from that. And, there's huge diversity among people generally, there's biodiversity and there's neurodiversity. And it's kind of always been there. So it's just, I think we need to even move away from awareness to acceptance now. We've been in this awareness phase for, I don't know, who is not aware. I mean, it's just, I think the acceptance phase is where we need to.
That is such a good point. It really is because we're kind of famous for doing that. It was like with breast cancer for the longest time. It was breast cancer awareness. It's like, oh, we're aware. Now let's, find a cure. And then with autism or any other disability, it's like we don't need the awareness. We need the acceptance and the education for others, I feel. You close your memoir with the idea of loving the alien.
That's a David Bowie reference for my son because he's a huge David Bowie fan. Just in case, not saying he's. Yeah, yeah. I think it's just coming full circle and talking about. I've been trying to model for my son when I had my own diagnosis. He was in a phase very much of not wanting to be autistic, wanting to be normal, not really valuing who he is. So I've tried over the years to show him the positives, show him the things. Yes, there are things that are hard, and also to model when there are things that I go through that are hard and not to shy away from showing him that, but also showing them like, look, there are some cool things, other cool things that you got from mom, other things you got from dad, and just not to view it as like a curse, because that was the message he was getting. And there are tricky ages. I mean, the book goes up to the point where he's 13. So what peers think, and you desperately want to be exactly like everybody else. So I'm hoping he can come to value who he is and how amazing he is, and some resilience after what he's obviously been through. He's almost 17 now, and lots of tricky things that he's been through, but he's tough. And again, so have I. So it's coming full circle, and I feel like we're like those sort of Russian dolls. We have all these other versions of ourselves within us. So I talk about like the little girl, and I remember the book ends with a memory I have where basically I was kind of shamed in public and internalized again this message that you're not right the way you are. So it's trying to go back and have some way of healing. And I think this book was a way for me to process a lot of things from the past and to move towards acceptance for myself and acceptance for my son. And future generations, obviously, I hope things will be very different, because there is so much information now, and so many people talking about it. I'm not the only one. So yeah, I very much hope there's no real excuse. There's a lot of information out there.
It's so true. I always try to, especially nowadays, because it's easy to feel like there is no bright side sometimes, but there's a lot of things that are, bright. When you think about the bright side, what comes to mind for you?
Well, I was thinking about it, and in terms with this, it does naturally feed into that because I think now we are at a point where girls are getting identified. They're not internalizing these messages of shame and blaming themselves, and earlier diagnoses are valuable. Some people think it's ridiculous. Why do you need a label? Why do you set them apart? Well, the reason people do need labels and they need is not only because they need support, if they can get support, but they will find their own labels otherwise. They will say they're lazy. They'll say they're stupid. They'll say they're not popular or whatever. A million and one labels. So I think it's really my hope is that I do see things changing, particularly for girls and different racialized populations that were excluded for a very long time. And yeah, I think it's great that people are getting. I heard it from someone who I think got diagnosed with autism that I think they were 70, and I was thinking, that's great. Like I bet, yeah, I know. Obviously, it's easy to be bitter and think, "Oh, I wish I had this information years ago. My life would have been so much different." But at least you're getting it at some point, and I don't think that self acceptance. I don't think there's like a sell by date on it. Um, I know for me, yeah, it's been a huge thing, and people can look and go, "Oh, "What's she talking about this middle-aged lady?" Like whatever.
No, I am hanging on every word. I really am.
I do think it's important. All the emphasis is on children, but I think um, if it helps, people have a lot of mental health issues and struggles. They've carried around a lot of this baggage, so I don't think it's too late to try to reverse some of that messaging.
I agree. Julie, your new book, your first book is called Motherness. There it is right there. Motherness, a memoir of generational autism, parenthood, and radical acceptance. You can find, it's available September 23rd. You can find more information about Julie on her website, which is juliemgreen.ca. And your Instagram account is at juliem.green. Julie, it's been great. I've been looking forward to this conversation. Your words are so meaningful, and congratulations on your book.
Thank you so much. It was great talking with you.
Thanks for listening to another episode of TELUS Talks with Tamara Taggart. Be sure to subscribe so you can join us every Tuesday for another conversation. You can also check out our website, telus.com/podcast, and subscribe to our YouTube channel at